In this video, let's talk about another concept in dependency injection, and that is lifetime management. So when we talk about the inversion of control principle, we mentioned that when we inject the instance of the object from outside, we no longer need to control the lifespan of this object, right? That's something else that is outside of this, which in this case, the framework is responsible. So let me repeat. The framework is now responsible to instantiate it and dispose it. So in other words, the framework is now controlling the lifespan of this object. So how does it do it? We must have a way to configure it to control the lifespan for the developer, right? The developer should have that control. And indeed, in ASP.NET Core, the framework provides you with that ability. So that has something to do with this function. There's three versions of this. The first one is add transient. The second one is add scoped. And the third one is add singleton. Let's start with add singleton. So if you have learned C# object-oriented programming, you might have heard of this terminology, singleton. Singleton, in this case at least, it means that this object is going to be created and stored in the dependency injection container throughout the lifetime of the application itself, which means that when the application is running like this, right? So this is a console application, right? When it's running like this, if you don't close this application, you are always going to get the same instance. So no matter where and when you ask for an instance of this abstraction interface, you are going to get the same instance. So that's what we call singleton, and that's how this add singleton method works. And in this particular case, we're dealing with a repository. So what is a repository? Let's go in here, right? Repository stores this list in memory. It represents an in-memory data store. In other words, it's an in-memory database. So a database can only have one instance. You cannot create many instances, then your data wouldn't be consistent. So therefore, when you use dependency injection and you're trying to register a mapping between the concrete implementation and the abstraction, you should use singleton for a in-memory data store. Otherwise, you're going to create many instances of this, and each time you're going to get different data. So for example, if I change this to use anything, so add transient, we use a different one, and then we're trying to run it, right? And it works for the home page. And now let's try to actually get employees. So these are the three different employees by default, right? Now let's try to add another one. Make sure the interface, the port number is correct. So I'm going to add Tom Anderson into it. And it actually said 201 created. Okay. Now if I go back to get employees and I click on send, you see I still have 1, 2, 3, only 3 employees. The fourth one is not actually added. Well, I have to change the statement. The fourth one was added, but now the employee repository instance is a different instance. It doesn't contain that fourth one anymore. The previous one that was used was already disposed. Now that's the short lifetime span that is associated with the add transient method. We're going to talk about the add transient method next. But right now, in order to fix the problem, we need to make sure that we register these pair of interface and classes with the add singleton method. This way, we only hold one instance of the repository throughout the application, and it's going to work as a in-memory data store. So let's run it this way, that it should be working. So click on send, make sure we have 3, and then go back to add employee, add Tom Anderson. Go back to get employees, click on the send button, and now we have the fourth one right here. And if we quickly test the rest of the functionalities, try to update the salary to a higher salary for Tom Anderson. and go back to get employees. So remember the previous one is only 120,000. Now Tom Anderson gets, I think this is 25 million. So update works. Now let's try to delete Tom Anderson because the person gets too much payment. So click on the send button now. Right, so it's 200 okay, and the object is deleted. Let's go back to get employees, click on send, and now we only see 3 different employees, and that's what we want to see. So everything still works, right? And remember to use add singleton in this case for employee repository. So you should use add singleton whenever you want to keep the instance, only one single instance throughout the application. Now we need to talk about transient and scoped. So there is this add transient, you have seen it, and add scoped, and what do they actually mean? So when we talk about transient or scoped, we need to go back to our diagrams. So let's go back to our diagram over here, and let's go to one of the previous ones. Allow me to find it. All right, so let's say we're dealing with this middleware, right? Well, every single ASP.NET Core application is implemented as a middleware pipeline. So we're having this diagram, and these are the 3 different middlewares that we can see right here. So each request comes into our web application, and the request will pass through these middlewares and eventually return back to the server as HTTP response. So when it passes through each one of these middlewares may require some services to be injected into it, right? It may ask for the dependency injection container to provide it with the instance of that object. Whenever the middleware asks for an instance of a abstraction, it always provides a new one. Then that's called transient, right? That lifespan of the object is called transient. Transient in English means, I actually not too sure about the actual meaning, but I think it's something that is very short, right? The lifespan of that object is very short. So in this case, if middleware component number 1 asks for an instance of, let's say, the employee repository object, it's going to have a new instance, right? It's going to create a new instance and feed it to the middleware. And then if the second one also asks for an instance of the employee repository interface, so it's again going to create another instance and feed it over here. So those 2 instances for this one and this one, they're different. And if the third one also asks for an instance of the abstraction, it's going to create a new instance. So if that is okay with your requirement, then you should use add transient, not add scoped, as transient. Right? Actually, that's most of the case. Most of the case you would use add transient. You don't need the object to be remembered. But then what is scoped lifespan? Right? We know the lifespan of singleton, which means that it lives throughout the application. We know the lifespan of transient, which means that whenever it is required, it's always going to be created as a new one. Then what is scoped? Well, scoped is something in between. The lifespan of a scoped object is going to be the same as the request, right? So HTTP request comes into the web application, and then it's going to live until the response is returned back to the browser, right? It's similar to like a round trip, right? The HTTP request comes in, then once the web application receives the HTTP context, then the web application is now trying to deal with the request. And then when you ask for an object to be created, the DI container is going to create that object and keep that instance in the DI container until the request object is disposed, right? So comes in and goes out. That's the lifespan of scoped object. A scoped object is useful, for example, in middleware component number 1, you want to use the object. And then another middleware component, right? For example, number 3, you want to use it again. And it doesn't make sense to create it again. In that case, you can use scoped lifespan. And the corresponding method here is going to be add scoped. But in this case, employees repository, it doesn't make sense to use add scoped, because a scoped employees repository only lives as long as the request comes into the middleware pipeline and goes out of the middleware pipeline and then gets disposed. And the same as the employee repository, it's going to be disposed when the request goes out of the middleware pipeline, right? Or at that similar moment. Therefore, for this particular instance, we're going to use add singleton, and you already know the differences between transient, singleton, and scoped. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll see you in the next one.